with my mouth open over here because I'm reading
the chat. No
comment. She said she didn't really like Gale in the movie.
She didn't?
Yeah, so I just read that and I was like, oh really? I left my mouth open for a second, so I laughed at myself when I read the comment.
Well, okay, so Gale is just dislikable in general in Mockingjay, but it's because he's the extreme. So for Gale, he was very much the extreme of, like, the ends justify the means. Like, nothing matters as long as we are victorious. Like, it doesn't matter what violent ends we have to do in order to succeed.
Getting scattering thought.
Yes. No, but so Gale is the extreme of the ends justify the means and what that represents in war. And then I think PETA is more like the pacifist, the one that's, at least in part one, right? I feel like that's kind of the roles that they play in part one, where Gale is the take up a sword, let's, kill everybody, and then... yeah. And then PETA is the pacifist, in which he's like, we need peace, there should not be war type of situation. But the scene that I utterly hated, and I didn't understand why I didn't hate it in the books, is because it never happened in the book, which is when PETA's second interview happened. Gale then tells him that he'd rather die than say half the things that PETA was saying. And it's so weird because he defends him before this. Like, he defends him for the first interview, which is basically the same thing that he said in the second interview. Except in the second interview, you clearly see he's forced and clearly see he's, like, malnourished and has been tortured. And so if he was willing to defend him when PETA looked super healthy and super great, it's, like, weird that a couple of days later he's just, like, so angry about it. But I know that they did it in order to create a rift between Katniss and Gale a little bit. It just very much seemed out of character for Gale to attack PETA in such a way, because in Mockingjay, he has been such a defender of PETA, and he does state in the books a lot more that he related more to PETA, and it's just kind of a different version of a guy that loves the same girl. And in the books, it's actually supposed to be Katniss and Finnick. And again, there's still defense. Like, Finnick's like, oh my god, they're torturing him. But he does state, like, hey, don't tell anyone we watched it. And for Katniss, how I read it was kind of a test to see who was loyal to her and who was loyal to the rebellion. And to be honest, everybody lost. Even Gale. Because he didn't tell her. He didn't, like, bring it up. And then that's the actual fight that they get to in the books, was like, you should have told me. Like, you should have informed me of this, but you kept it from me. And I think that scene is so important in the book. That
made more sense in the book than in the movie.
Yeah. And the reason that I love that scene for the book, and it makes more reason for the story, is because it starts building doubt in the back of Katniss's mind that there are things that Gale will not tell her. And I think it then goes to the ending where Gale is the one that she asked for confirmation. Because of this earlier fight, she knows that he won't make that mistake again. And that's the thing that I think is very interesting about the Mockingjay book, is that it shows more character development for Gale than anybody else, because he gets the most consequences in his way of thinking throughout this whole book. Because he constantly says, even from, like, book one, that he's like, like, as a rebel, like, I would sacrifice myself. I would believe that anybody should sacrifice themselves for the war, and, like, one death doesn't matter for the victory of the war. And then he later regrets that choice.